Great. Okay. Just thanks to everybody for being here. Thanks to all the panelists. This is our second event with the Global Critical Studies and Praxis group. Is that correct, Rebecca? Second or third at this point? Third event. Today we're going to be talking about the turn to the right in education and academia. We've got a great set of panels here. I'm gonna just kind of go in and turn it over to our panelists in the interest of time. Every one of them is going to have about 7 minutes to speak, and we are going to start out with Ellen Schrecker, who's going to be talking to us, going to be putting this contemporary turn to the right in the context of McCarthyism and the attack on academic freedom in the 50s. And I just wanted to Müge, just wanted to let you know that you're going to be number 5 in terms of the presentations. Okay, great, Ellen. Take it away, please.
Sure. I've done a lot of writing and research about McCarthyism, the so-called McCarthyism, the Red Scare of the early Cold War. And I'm usually asked, how did every time political repression rears its ugly head, I get asked by my colleagues, journalists, and ordinary people, how does it compare to McCarthyism, what's happening today? And usually I'm being a well-trained historian, I sort of fudge a bit and say, well, it depends on the situation, on the local history and culture, and I want to add some nuance. Well, today, no more nuance. Um, what's happening today is existentially, exponentially worse than anything that happened during McCarthyism, which was pretty bad in and of itself and has long been considered the most serious attack until now on higher education. Now, during the late 40s and early 50s, at the height of McCarthyism, at least 100 faculty members were fired and blacklisted, but only because of their relationship, their past or present relationship to the communist movement of the 1930s and 40s, and their then current refusal to cooperate with McCarthyism's demands for them to repudiate their past association with that movement. They were never asked about their teaching or research. Significantly, every school that housed some such people investigated them. They didn't just say it's none of our business, doesn't affect their academic work. Instead, like all other mainstream institutions within American society, they responded to the witch hunt, and it looked into the lives of their employees, which had been, and in their heads there's a kind of demonized portrayal of the communist movement that every mainstream institution bought into. Within the universities, it was that they were clearly unfit to teach. Why? Because they were robots under communist control, under Moscow's control, who indoctrinated their students and sought to overthrow the United States. None of this was true. But the universities, without any evidence of academic misconduct, called up every single faculty member and questions that had been identified by official and unofficial um, witch hunters, like congressional committees, like the FBI in particular. And the taint of communism was so strong that um, universities fired every single person who refused to cooperate with their investigation, and many who did cooperate. That repression created enormous amounts of self-censorship on American universities, within universities. There was literally no organized opposition to this. Um, the only opposition came from the victims themselves, and they were, most of them, pushed out of the academy for at least a decade. The AAUP, which today is leading much of the fight against political repression in the university, was absent. It issued no reports on the enormous number of violations of academic freedom during the late 40s and 1950s. No reports at all within between 1947 and 1956. Now, McCarthyism finally came to an end, mainly because of the social movements of the 60s, especially the civil rights movement, the student movement, and the anti-war movement, and forced the mainstream institutions of American life, not just universities, to respond to those social movements rather than the non-existent threat of communist subversion, which had dominated so much domestic politics during the 1950s. Now, ironically, the same time period that McCarthyism was building up was also what was considered by many scholars to be
We're at 2 minutes, Helen.
the golden age of higher education. Universities are expanding enormously, state legislators and the federal government throwing money at people. But they, these universities were also, like every other sector of American society, under pressure to respond to these demands for greater democratization. And that often led to student protests and unrest on campuses, which where administrators had never encountered this kind of student political activity. And what do? They're under a lot of pressure from trustees and the public and politicians, and they crack down, makes more unrest, and jump starts a sort of um, hibernating right-wing repression, the backlash against the movements, social movements of the 1960s, usually couched in the language of opposition to the crazy students and their tenured faculty instigators, as it were. Um, there's many of the problems are the result of a campaign on the part of a right-wing network of billionaires who are pushing a neoconservative, neoliberal agenda on the rest of American political society. This is the turn to the right, and it's affecting universities in a lot of ways. One, there's this massive campaign by these right-wing think tanks, professors, programs that are trying to impose a right-wing economic agenda on American higher education. And they're very successful. To this day, they have obviously taken over the Republican Party and are cracking down today in ways that are worse than McCarthyism, with one exception. And the one, I could go into this in more detail, but I only have no more minutes. So the response of the university, actually, they were shooting themselves in the foot or the head while all this is going on, because they're responding to the new austerity that the neoliberal agenda placed on the universities. They're ignoring their faculty. That's the end of faculty governance. They're raising tuitions. They're trying to respond, move to the right, adopt business practices, adopt a business managerial mentality, and cut costs. And how do they do that? Besides raising tuition, they are hollowing out the faculty. and this is the most devastating thing of all, is that by now, somewhere between 70 and 75% of all American instruction is in the hands of non-tenure track faculty members, part-time and temporary teachers who have terrible pay, no economic security, and they are can be fired at any time. And so what we're dealing with is a very weakened university responding to the worst attack on it in its history. And let me just say that initially it was capitulating. Now we're seeing a little bit more pushback. And that never happened during McCarthyism. This is something I want to emphasize a lot because I'm sure the rest of you are going to talk about it as well. Or I hope the rest of you are going to talk about it as well, which is that for the first time in its history, American faculty members, American students, even a few administrators are responding to political repression by saying, no, no more, we're fighting back. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Thanks. That's great. Really helpful. Okay, great. Gabriela.
Hi, thank you everyone for being here, and thank you, Ellen, for sharing all of that background. My hope for my portion is to bring into perspective a lot of what you shared and the roots of what we're dealing with and how that's shaped my work in education. So my background is a public school teacher, former school board member in San Francisco, and now I'm a PhD candidate, current researcher at Stanford University, trying to bring in all of those experiences into the academic space. And what I'm really hoping people understand is this turn to the right in the experience that I've had and what I've lived through and learned is a governance strategy. And what that looks like is how the turn operates inside institutions, how it reshapes equity agendas depending on the people who are in power and the information they're sharing and what they're pushing back on and saying no to, and how it disciplines public officials. So, when this discussion on the turn to the right, when we talk about it in education, we often imagine legislative bans or loud culture wars. But when we think about San Francisco, a lot of that really looks like a progressive city with a progressive agenda that does all it can to protect the students it's serving. And as someone who is closely aligned with those values, I saw this attack from a number of people who see San Francisco as something that we need to move away from nationally, and why billionaires were so involved in specifically the recall of school board members, which I am one of. So I'm seeing this as a reframing of equity as political, and the elevation of neutrality, merit, and parental rights, which is something that we fought through and saw a lot of, and the repositioning of justice work, which a lot of our teachers do in our classrooms, as outside of the core mission of education. This idea that the right believes we need to go back to, when America was great, and the messaging around that, meaning that anything that's justice related is something that needs to be attacked. I have an example in my current work, given what we do in San Francisco around ethnic studies and how this is the birthplace. I mean, we were just talking about how these social movements are viewed as political activity among students. And in San Francisco, we birthed ethnic studies at San Francisco State University. So the school district was one of the leading districts in the nation that implemented ethnic studies in 2010. And my work on the board was really pushing that forward and ensuring it remains protected. It's, a curriculum that is a part of the work that we do in our districts in California. And just recently, debates emerged about pausing the mandatory ethnic studies implementation as teachers were entering into summer summer break. And what this shows is, again, this framing equity is a distraction from academic fundamentals. And there are a lot of debates on why ethnic studies is something that students shouldn't have access to. This idea that justice-centered curriculum is controversial rather than foundational. There are so many reports and studies that we have access to that show how important ethnic studies is for young people, specifically marginalized communities, and how often that is framed as an attack is something I saw as a school board member and I see now as a researcher. And the fact that many of our individual teachers, educators who are in the classroom dedicating their time to supporting young people are also getting attacked. This is something that happens in our city and something that's happening nationally, which is another form or another example really of how these efforts look to individual people and how they impact and affect all of the lives of those people who work with students. So as a now researcher, it's something I've been keeping in mind when I'm seeking to have these discussions, considering, even the topic that we're noting today and how it could have easily been something that was targeted, because they don't even want a lot of these discussions to be had. And what I understand is this turn does not always remove equity programs outright. It often reframes them as dangerous or extremist. And once that label sticks, governing mechanisms follow. So the people who are now on the board who have been included in the seat after we were recalled are more compliant. They remove things that were once equity focused and no longer included on the agenda. They've instituted a lot of change that makes it more difficult for the public to engage with an elected board. And that's because we have created a dynamic that's a national trend to instill fear in the people who are in power and ensure that they're not the ones who are next, who are going to be attacked, who are going to be penalized because of the discussions we're having, specifically around race and racism. So just a brief background on these recalls. In 2021, school board recalls quadrupled nationwide. And what many communities were aiming to do is to remove people who were doing work that was equity focused. So during COVID, this looked like school boards who instituted mask wearing in schools or closed schools to protect families. This was during the CRT panic. And in our case, admissions reform. There were a lot of things that were making it harder for people to deal with and recognize that harm is happening in our schools, especially in San Francisco. And what I noticed is if these debates, just with ethnic studies and recall efforts, that pressure becomes institutionalized within governance. It leads to individuals who are in these positions of power that just end any justice-oriented efforts. And I know I'm running
We're
out
at
of time.
time. So yeah, we just need to wrap up. Thanks.
Okay. Well, I just want to know, as someone who has sat at the Board of Education and now studies it, I see this as a moment, not as episodic backlash, but as a test of whether public education is a site of pluralism or if we're retreating into preservation. And I know we'll talk more.
Great, thanks a lot. Our next speaker is Michaela.
Hi, everyone. My name is Michaela Musto, and I'm an assistant professor of sociology at Brown University. Before I begin, I'd like to thank Rebecca for organizing this panel, Dylan for presiding over it, and for the other panelists for sharing their work. I've already learned so much, and I can't wait to hear what everybody else has to say. And it's just an honor to be here speaking about such an important and timely topic. But when delivering the keynote address at the National Conservatism, that's a really hard word, Conservatism Conference in 2021, Vice President J.D. Vance described universities as a set of very hostile institutions. He said higher education was producing research that gives credibility to some of the most ridiculous ideas that exist in our country. His solution was to honestly and aggressively attack the universities in this country. And referring to a previous quote that President Nixon had made, he said that the professors are the enemy. It can be difficult for academics to take quotes like this from conservative politicians seriously, especially when politicians are weaponizing our own academic concepts against us. But as sociologists, we also recognize that what politicians say and do reflects broader structural patterns rather than just the behavior of a few. We also know that the dominant group has historically tended to push back against social policies and legislations that attempt to redistribute power, status, and opportunities across the United States. Nixon, for example, first called professors the enemy in 1972, which as other panelists have already mentioned, was following in the wake of several different activists, student activist movements and the civil rights movements that were all happening around the same time. So today, I want to take a step back and ask, what is it about the education system that encourages affluent white men to feel so confident that their worldviews are valid and true? And why do they think that everyone else who challenges them is ridiculous? These are questions that I answer in my in-progress book manuscript, which is under advanced contract with the University of Chicago Press. The book is tentatively titled The Worst Years of Your Life, The Making of White Male Entitlement in Middle School. So you can stay tuned. You're getting a sneak peek today. But this manuscript draws on 2.5 years of ethnographic research and just under 200 interviews that I did with students at a school that I call Mountain Heights Middle School. I followed the same cohort of students across their 6th through 8th grade years at the school. For today's talk, it's important to know that this was a high-performing public school in a racially diverse, affluent, and liberal suburb of Los Angeles. I'm going to focus on one group of students in my talk today. You're going to hear a little, so very little bit from white boys who finished middle school believing that they were smarter than everyone else. Not every white boy at the school exhibited this trajectory, but the ones that did tended to be extremely affluent. Most of their parents had attended elite institutions of higher education, and their parents often held jobs in prestigious occupations, and they owned multi-million-dollar homes in Los Angeles. And most of the boys that you'll be hearing from today were also planning on pursuing careers in politics and law when they were older. But by the time that they were finished with 8th grade, these white boys were also extremely critical of public schools. Take Zach, who hated the way that public school teachers wanted students to be, as he put it, right in the middle. Teachers seemed to favor students who were neither too smart nor too dumb. Zach felt frustrated with his 8th grade honors English teacher in particular. Several months earlier, she had assigned a novel about a Black 17-year-old boy who was on trial for felony murder. One of Zach's friends, who was also a white boy, had drawn a picture of, and I quote, a guy with an afro and a pick in his hair. Sounding much like our vice president, Zach called his teacher ridiculous for declaring his friend's drawing racist. This was one of the numerous incidents that led Zach to conclude that he couldn't express his own opinions and his own views in this school. It seemed unfair to him that you could be sent to the principal's office for saying something like, I don't like gay people, just for example. For this reason, he was planning on attending a private high school in Los Angeles the following year. Other white boys also finished middle school describing their academic experiences in strikingly similar ways. And yet, it's important to note that white boys like Zach were neither the highest achieving nor the best behaved students in their cohort. Instead, students who averaged higher levels of achievement than Zach often finished 8th grade casting doubt on their own abilities. They were often afraid to speak up in class, oftentimes because they were afraid that boys like Zach would criticize or laugh at them if they said something that was perceived as incorrect, wrong, or quote unquote stupid. So how had this happened? Before 6th graders even set foot on campus at the beginning of middle school, white boys like Zach had been sorted into the school's honors and advanced courses that were almost entirely full of affluent, white, and Asian American students. In these classrooms, teachers perceived and treated students as if they really were superior to other students at the school. Their classrooms were lively. They encouraged students to debate one another. They played competitive games. and they were lenient about enforcing rules that applied elsewhere at the school, especially to Latinx boys, who I don't have time to talk about, but had an extremely different experience than white boys did in the school's honors classes. So this classroom environment advantaged white boys who broke the rules. They received the most praise and attention from their teachers and peers in situations when they interrupted, criticized, and provoked others. This was evident in the way that Zach thought he had too many opinions, a belief that he learned through the years that teachers had subtly praised him in situations when his ideas could have been deemed incorrect, off-topic, distracting, or harmful to others. So as white boys like Zach grew older, they started to take pride in their ability to state opinions that differentiated them from others at the school. Consider what Blake had to say. When I interviewed him near the end of the 8th grade, he was already feeling frustrated by the way that his teachers deemed his talking and debating to be a bit of an issue. Sometimes his teachers told him that he needed to let other people speak. Or if he expressed an unpopular opinion, they said there wasn't enough time for a debate, which is part of the reason why he thought that teachers at the school weren't very good. Like Zach, he was also considering enrolling in a top private high school in Los Angeles after he graduated middle school. Although he knew that teachers didn't like his tendency to interrupt and speak over others, he also couldn't help but disagree when it came to topics like immigration or healthcare. He said it was a jerk move to expect wealthier people to subsidize the system for others.
Okay, Michaela, we're at time now, so if you could just wrap up.
Oh, perfect. So I'll just wrap up really quickly. I finished research a few months before Trump's term in office began, but it's not difficult to hear echoes of the current political moment in Blake and Zach's responses. Over the past decade, we've seen these loud political attacks from conservative white men, and they have become increasingly convinced that they are being shortchanged in an education system that confers unearned advantages and special treatment to everyone else like them. So we can talk more about this during the Q&A, but the point that I really want to leave you with is that schools, and especially racialized academic trackings that start in middle school, are part of the process that contribute to this. So we really need to rethink the ways that education happens, not just in higher education, but all the way through the K-12 system, if we want to end up with a different system moving forward. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. That was great, Michaela. Ranita.
All right, I'm going to get right into it because, all right. Okay, so book bans, immigration raids, erasure of Black, immigrant, queer students and their histories are spreading like wildfire in the US. Public education is once again cast into the political spotlight as Trump administration is fighting to dismantle the department altogether. Much of the liberal and even radical left has taken up a familiar line. We must defend the institution of public education. We're told this is the moment to rally behind educators and public institution. Most of us accept the classroom as the last bastion against fascism. It is a comforting narrative. Equal access to public education, K-12 and higher ed, we see as the panacea for dismantling all oppressive systems and for confronting fascism. I've spent nearly 2 decades studying education in the US. For my latest research, I spent 3 years shadowing a cohort of students and their teachers inside one of the largest public school districts in the nation in Las Vegas, Nevada. This became my 2025 book, Slow Violence: Confronting Dark Truths in the American Classroom. For those of us writing about public education, K-12 and higher ed, from within the Black radical and third world tradition, though, this narrative of education, institutions of education versus fascism is a misleading and dangerous narrative. US public schools and higher ed have long functioned as a key institution through which state power and structural violence are enacted and maintained. Let's be clear, schooling is not the same as education. The US school systems has always functioned to discipline, assimilate, and sort children, as we saw in Michaela's talk. From Native American boarding schools to the forced pathologization of Black and immigrant children, public schooling has never been neutral terrain. It has always been a site of state violence. So the idea of an external attack on public education is often misleading. Sometimes my argument is that the call is coming from inside the home. And teachers play a key role in this. Take, for example, the fact that in the 2024 US presidential election, 37% of all public school teachers and 50% of teachers below the age of 40 voted for Donald Trump and J.D. Vance. Add to this that 80% of public school teachers are white. Despite the proliferation of diversity trainings, racial equity frameworks, and liberal anti-bias initiative, anti-Blackness and anti-immigrant xenophobia remains a daily feature of US life inside the classroom. Of course, voting behavior does not neatly align with pedagogical approaches or behavior in the classroom, but it's a mirror, it's a window into what happens inside classrooms. And yet, again and again, we're asked to believe that teachers as a class are allies. Headlines abound announcing teachers as under attack. Teachers are holding the line. Teachers are the resistance. They are the victims. They're trying their best, and they're too constrained by standards, or overwhelmed by bureaucracy, or simply unaware of the harm. None of this should surprise us. White teachers are not a monolith, but they're embedded in and often loyal to a system that has positioned them as caretakers of the state. We do ourselves and our movements a disservice when we flatten the political terrain, mistaking pity for solidarity, passivity for resistance, and liberal hand-wringing for a commitment to justice. As we saw in both Gabriela and Michaela's talk, what does it mean that so many of us still assume that teachers regret the book ban, that they're invested in truth-telling about empire, about anti-Blackness? What does it mean that we're still surprised when they aren't? In the classrooms where I conducted observations, Black and brown immigrant girls, for example, frequently outperform their peers, a pattern that mirrors national trends in academic achievement. Yet, excellence offered no insulation from racialized gender harassment from educators in the classroom. Inside the schools where I spent time, achievement coexisted with humiliation among Black and brown girls. Leadership invited scrutiny among them. Their brilliance did not forestall punishment. Consider Jada, a fourth grader. I came to know her well. She was at the top of her class in both math and English, an accomplished artist and an informal leader among her peers, just at 10 years old. One afternoon, bored, she and her few friends took a few candies from the teacher's reward box. It was a minor infraction, an ordinary 10-year-old mischief. But the incident metastasized into what school staff dubbed as the candy ring. For months, Jada and her friends were marked as thieves, cunning, future dangers to society. What might have been resolved with a brief conversation instead became durable stigma. What I witnessed extend beyond harsh punishment for minor infractions. Some teachers openly mocked immigrants, expressed disgust toward children of color, harassed disabled children, and ridiculed fat children. And these are no unique to the classrooms where I was embedded. Though teaching is often framed as a selfless vocation, not all who enter the profession do so from a commitment to marginalized communities. Pathways into teaching are shaped by labor markets, credentializing regimes, and personal ambition, as much as by political conviction. And these differences matter. Several educators I interviewed, without irony, asked for a White History Month. They deployed language of racial progressivism to rationalize racial grievances. Refusal to grapple with the political contradictions of teaching has consequences. It shows up in how we prepare our teachers, in how we organize inside schools, and in how we misrecognize white emotionality as radical commitment. It keeps us locked in a loop, reacting to each new wave of state repression and attack on public education, but failing to organize with clarity that these times demand. If we're serious about liberation, Black, queer, collective, then we must stop investing in the idea that teachers are inherently aligned with us. Many are not, some are. Some are somewhere in between, complicit in the ways they do or will not name. The point is not to demonize teachers. It is to understand the institution they work for and often defend. Teachers versus fascists is not the fight we're in. The actual fight is against the very logic, the carcerality, whiteness, obedience, nationalism that public education so efficiently reproduces when it is working the way we want it to. The actual fight is recognizing white agency in fascism. We don't need more stories or better stories or well-meaning teachers. We need ruptures. We need organizing that refuses nostalgia for public education and instead imagines what it would mean to build spaces of learning rooted in Black life and queer logic and not in state legitimacy. Public education is not neutral. Teachers are not apolitical or worse, unilaterally left. And to love our children, we need to urgently interrogate public schools as sites of state violence and not as the last bastion against fascism.
Thanks very much. Great talk and absolutely super disciplined timing. Okay, thank you. Müge.
Hi, I'm actually going to be talking about the right turn in higher education, and I will be employing a critical Du Boisian approach in doing so, so that I will not only focus on the structural elements that have led to, I think, the right turn, but also bring in my own experience as a sociology professor at the University of Michigan, as well as a practicing sociologist, in the field, through writing articles, books, and also participating in annual conferences and such. And I basically, the argument that I will be making is based on the undergraduate course that I teach at the moment, called America in Decline, From the Kennedys to the Kardashians, where I trace the transition of the United States from a progressive social welfare state, at least in name, let's say, to a conservative neoliberal state through the reigns of various presidents. I argue that the neoliberal turn, as such, commenced in the late 1970s to then become institutionalized under Presidents Reagan and Clinton, reproduced under Presidents Bush, Obama, and Biden, and weaponized by President Trump. While the neoliberal turn in the US has been well documented, its adverse impact on US society in general and US higher education in particular has been analyzed in depth in the last 5 years. And I have, if you are interested, you can write to me and I can send you the paper I have, because I have literally about 110 currently written books on the adverse impact of neoliberalism on the one side and its adverse impact on education specifically on the other, where I was able to pull literally 47 titles that were mostly written in the last couple, of years. Now, what is it, if you look at things structurally, what is it that neoliberalism sort of does? I think increasing financialization moves the economy and society away from capital employed for industrial production to the management of capital in the world markets that is not even predicated on industrial production any longer as it was before. And what comes up as a consequence? Liberalization, privatization, marketization, securitization, and austerity ensue as a consequence. If you then look at, how do these societal developments impact U.S. higher education? There are two things. One is the commodification of knowledge, and the other one is the marketization of science ensue as a consequence. Lawrence Bush identifies the market-like changes that have been instituted in 5 points, and I will go through them because I think they're important. The first is shifting the cost of education from the state to individual students, to redefining higher education as a search for the highest paying job. 3, turning scholarly research into an individualized form of competition based on a wide range of metrics, such as number of citations, the value of grants you bring in, and 4, instituting national and global competitions among universities and research institutes for funding and prestige, and 5, increasing the numbers and enhancing the power and salaries of administrators in return for pursuing these market-like objectives. Hence, the university's role in society, I would argue, has shifted from an institution predicated on the production and reproduction of scientific knowledge for the public good to a corporation competing to get students ready for the job market. Now I will move from the structural to the experiential, where I will talk about how I perceive how things have changed at the University of Michigan, where I've been after I got my PhD, literally, for a long time. And I think the turn to the right at the U of M started in the aftermath of 9/11, 2001, with an increase in the securitization of the campus and our own literature, science, and arts, which I will refer now hereafter as LSNA. And the securitization of the campus and the building, our LSNA building, against possible terrorist attacks. The securitization heightened during and after 2003 as the United States intervened militarily in Afghanistan and Iraq. The corporatization of the securitization commenced during and after the 2008 financial crisis, when many businesses who could no longer operate in the faltering corporate world discovered public universities, or universities in general, as a new financial resource to exploit. Corporate consultants arrived with their corporate model to make our university more efficient and cost-effective, as if that were the fundamental goal of academia, rather than knowledge production and dissemination. And gradually, all different units of our large university were administratively centralized. Decision-making power moved away from departments, first to LSNA, and then bypassing the provost to the university president. Yet presidential power was limited and controlled by the ultimate decision-making body, namely the Board of Regents. Effectively, I would argue, the University of Michigan is governed now by the regents, who have absolute power to appoint or fire the president and all others under them. And the Board
Okay,
of
so we're
Regents
at
is
time.
okay. Then wow.
Yeah. Oh,
Okay.
did you get to 2-minute warning?
Okay. Then the main body has, and the regions. Basically, if you look at the composition of the regions, there are 4 of them are in finance. The other 4 are in law, and the ones, they're all business people, with the exception of one person. There's only one person among the 8 who actually is a faculty member somewhere. The rest all represents the interests of law and economics, and I think that is the problem with it. Now, if you look at that, what I do as a practicing sociologist, one important component is that, unfortunately, many university presses that print our journals have literally joined the conservative members to change the boards, such as Theory and Society, for example, is now under new conservative leadership that has just recently published 2 articles that criticize the critical turn in general as being sort of bad. The other example that I know better is the Social Science History Association, on which I was a member at some point on the board, where the association hired an editor with the intent to diversify the association. But when the new editor brought in some critical articles, they were desk rejected by 2, the managing editor and an administrator, as a consequence of which, rather than addressing what was happening, SSHJ board decided to fire this new diversity editor 3 years into her 6-year term. So that, I think, is another indication of where we are headed. And of course, I resigned with others from SSHA in protest, and we have, these new venues through which to express our express our views. Finally, and I'll end with this, if you look at how we practice sociology, our annual meetings are always, of course, at hotels and places where attendance literally is in three figures already. It has gone up precipitously, as well as the hotels that we have to go at charge anywhere from $250 above. And if you go there for 3 days, I mean, it is impossible, given the salaries that we make, for us to sustain all of that, unless, of course, universities sort of give us subsistence to do so. And they are doing that less and less. And I'll finish there. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Yeah. Okay, what a great and really, yeah, really interesting and varied series of comments. So I'll just kind of make a few comments and just try to keep it really very brief. I want to just, in terms of sort of framing about, I think, and thinking about the papers as a whole. I think it might be useful to think about three different approaches to this question of the right turn in academia and in education more broadly. And the classification depends on, we could say, the direction of the attack. So we sort of have one set of scholars. I think Gabriela, in a way, is in this position that sees the attack as largely external and from below, a kind of manipulated popular opinion. There's a second position that sees an attack that is largely external, but sort of from above. And I think that's where Musto and Goçek are fitting in. And then we have a third position that sees that or emphasizes processes that are internal to education. And I think that's where Musto and Ray are sort of falling on this. And I think I just want to suggest that I would say sort of making two comments about these different points. One is the question of, I mean, in my opinion, this position of the external internal is very important. I think it might be important to emphasize actually the internal fragmentations, not just at the level of K through 12 education, but also within higher education itself. And I think that what is going on with the current attack is I appreciate Ellen's points about what appears to be perhaps some coalescing resistance in higher ed, but I also think that there is a kind of score settling that is happening within universities. And I'm struck as much by the political fragmentation of the faculty as I am its unity. And I think that's something we should really think about. And the way that I would put it is I think it's probably true to say that, especially in the social sciences and the humanities, there are very few politically MAGA aligned academics, but there is a larger group that I think is quite happy to use certain attacks on higher ed, particularly Trump's compact with higher ed, as a way to pursue their own interests inside academia. What I would call, somewhat ironically, and in reference to my own discipline, the "Make Sociology Great Again" movement, which is a real phenomenon that needs to be understood. The second thing, just very briefly, is how to understand neoliberalism and the development of capitalism and higher ed in the context of that, not higher ed actually exclusively, but education more generally. And I guess what I would say is that in some ways, just drawing on both Müge and Alan's comments, it strikes me that one of the main problems that we are facing in education is not so much that we are subordinated to capitalism, but capitalism is less and less interested in having, at least American capitalism, and for reasons that we can talk about, is simply not very interested in investing in the education of its population. And that has everything to do with the emergence of a model of capitalist accumulation, which is not based on investment and transformation of use values into physical commodities, blah, 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 blah. That is to say, this new form of financialized capitalism, or what I've called in different contexts, political capitalism, which is creating a kind of disjuncture. It's creating a kind of structural irrelevance of education that is a real problem. The third thing I just want to put out there, just as an observation before we open things up to questions, is the question of continuity or discontinuity within neoliberalism. And it has to do with, I guess, the way to understand the most recent period, whether is it correct to think about the MAGA attack on the university as essentially a continuation of a longer neoliberal attack, or is it not a real inflection point? And I guess the way that I would think about it, and linking it back to what I was saying about the internal issue, the internal fragmentations, I think in some ways, one of the main consequences of neoliberalism, at least for the university, I think it's probably a different discussion for K through 12, is a kind of general fragmentation of solidarity among the academic staff, we could say, and that has created a situation in which I think that there's a way in which what MAGA represents is there's a kind of right-wing rejection of neoliberalism that needs to be understood. There's a kind of nostalgia of going back to the past that needs to be understood, which it's not exactly standard issue neoliberalism. It's a new type of thing. And it creates a different kind of political dynamic. And in this, I would just like to associate myself with Ray's comments at the end. I think it's important to avoid nostalgia in this moment. It's not at all clear to me that academia, as we have known it from mid-century to, you could say, roughly 2020 or so, is going to survive in the same way. And we need to think about really a fundamentally new model of education. But with that, I just want to open it up to the audience. Thanks a lot for everyone's talks. So the floor is open. Well, while people are gathering their thoughts, maybe what we should do is go back to our panelists, and maybe this time we can just go in reverse order and see if people had thoughts about what I said as people are gathering their thoughts. So yeah, so let's start. With you, Müge, and just go back through and just see if there's maybe just a few comments in reaction to what I've said or what others have said on the panel.
I actually thank all of them. I've learned a lot, especially about the US educational system. And I wasn't brought up in the system. I came as an outsider from Istanbul, Turkey. So what is interesting for me in what you said is you are talking about the political dimension, especially the fragmentation among faculty. We do not have much fragmentation as such, because there have been many sort of moves by the Senate with all the faculty gathering and putting in and protesting everything that the administration has done ever since I've been here. But especially in the last 5 years, where we had 5 different presidents, by the way, within the neoliberal context, none of what we said ever made a dent on what they were doing. I mean, what I have learned is however much political agency we may have with each other, that doesn't translate into political agency in getting the university to take what we're seeing seriously and make changes. Usually, I mean, the best we can do is serve on committees. I served on the Inclusive History Project, and there where we try to sort of bring these things in. But unfortunately, after the Trump thing, the administration, basically the Board of Regents, decided to sort of literally cap diversity, cap gender studies, and not at all at least think about the problems and issues that faculty have. So that's what at least been my impression, and I'm very happy to also learn about the K through 12 education system. And since both of my children went through that system here, I totally concur with what you're saying. I mean, I think we need to do is to question this white supremacy, the white hegemony that not only determines our economy, but our societal structure as well. Otherwise, we will continue to be marginalized and stigmatized by the others. And I'm speaking also as a faculty of color here. Thank you.
Ranita.
I was, ever since you talked about Dylan, make sociology great again, I was just like, collecting all the examples of very, very immediate and instances of the same, and sort of thinking about institutional distrust and mistrust, and what happens when we collectively organize, and how there's always these fears of being doxxed, even when you think you're organizing with comrades, and I think that is a mirror image of K through 12. I think that we think not only is there like a channel from higher ed to K through 12, but yeah.
Great. Gabriela.
Someone else has a question, FYI.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah, I wanted to.
should we take a question from Simeon? Yeah. Simeon, go ahead.
Thanks for the talks all. Yeah, what scary times. And it's really great to learn from your insights. I guess I wanted to add just two thoughts. The first one is that it seems like, one of the things that's particular, a lot of what was talked about is the US specifically. And I guess one thing that seems particular about the US is that there's, I guess we could say, like a long way to fall if we're talking about higher education, or at least elite higher education. Sort of a long way to fall in two senses. One, because it was such a priority in the post-war era. Müge, you referenced like Kennedy, but Kennedy and Johnson increased tons of funding into higher education, right, and education more generally. But the whole sort of guns and butter sort of program of U.S. education, which is something a little different, I think, than higher education writ large, right? Like the U.S. was, I don't know, it had a big, and then of course, in the through the cosmopolitan neoliberal era, there continue to be tons of resources in higher education, but that's probably driven much more by the conversion of elite universities into hedge funds with an educational mission or something like this, right? But some of that does end up then falling to people who are inside the university, and then there's sort of resources to avail oneself of in that kind of setting. And I guess, to the degree that university leaderships just really tries to reorient universities in a very different way, then it seems like, yeah, it's a long way to fall, I guess, from having those kinds of resources. And that's a little different from, UK universities, Euro universities, Canadian universities anywhere else where they just weren't as kind of jacked up on finance capital as American universities were. So then thinking about, and then now for the second thing, like the question of expertise, I don't think is going away. In the US, obviously the kind of, quote unquote, populist type of rhetoric of MAGAs and stuff makes it seem like expertise is less of an issue. But I guess it seems like, at least if we're talking beyond the US, then expertise won't go away. But what will happen is it'll be defined more and more in, probably on the one hand, like military terms. Like higher education is going to be it's going to continue to be important, but going to be tied more closely to the military build out that we see everywhere, basically. And not that it wasn't tied to military before, because everybody knows there's all these defense contracts that feed through universities and stuff, but like to the degree that the militarization stuff increases, it's going to pull like higher education like along with that, I think. And then on the other side, there's all this, to the degree that cosmopolitan neoliberalism is over, there's like the need and appetite for like revival of like proper nationalist narratives of who, we are in each respective kind of national context. So I think we see a bit of that in higher education too, if we're talking like Central European higher education. So you see like a kind of STEM reorientation of higher education around kind of military stuff on the one side, and then a humanities kind of reorientation of higher education around like new narratives to try to excavate, accounts of, why we are essentially the way we are, as Poles or as, Canadians or whatever. So, yeah, two thoughts. Thanks very much for your stimulating comments.
Thanks for that. Who wants to take a stab at that?
I think we should continue with Gabriela and finish at least sort of our things, taking into account what Simeon has wisely said in addition.
Let's do it.
Yeah, I mean, I've gathered so many thoughts, just given our discussion and what was just shared. I'm really sitting with this internal, external, I'll call battle. I mean, if we're sticking to military terms, but just in general, these fights that we're having, and this idea that now we have issues on all sides, and ultimately what we know is education has never been protected. Ensuring that students gain knowledge and a sense of self and contribute to communities in thoughtful ways has never been something that educational systems prioritize. And when they do, they are attacked, and they go after the communities that are leading these efforts, as Ellen helped set the tone, and frame them as political. So a lot of what I'm really sitting with is, what is a conversation around what becomes political and why that is, and how that currently is feeding a lot of the fear that people are feeling within their classrooms. And I've known that through the K through 12 system, and I'm now seeing it at the higher education level with professors I work with, or with future professors that I'm in communication with in my program. And I always sit with this, but just a message that I hope we can continue to share with folks is how we will do the work to protect each other when we are trying to push back on this powerful agenda and remain in the positions we are in, so that we can ultimately protect education and students who will be in the fields that we're seeking now. And that means, putting ourselves on the line, however that looks, when we are the ones under attack. But I saw so many of that in the discussions that we're seeing now, and how a lot of it, I mean, maybe we can hear from Michaela next about, how young people we're seeing that so early on in their schooling.
Yeah, Michaela, please.
Thank you for everybody's remarks. Building up, I think where Gabriela left off, and also thinking about what everybody else has said. Dylan, one of the phrases that I wrote down when you were speaking was like the right wing rejection of neoliberalism, and like, is this something that we know that something different is going on right now, but we're not 100% sure like what it is, or maybe it's the same thing, and I don't want to like paint like change is it's never linear and it's always happening like like society's always changing and it's like not the same depending on where we are. So I don't want to like go too far into sort of like making like a too broad of a statement, but I do think that one thing that my findings could help us understand is the ways that whiteness and masculinity are implicated in this process. And if we think about like white boys in school, what they're really good at is positioning themselves as different than everybody. And other boys do this too. Like it's well documented within existing research. But because white supremacy, when white boys distance themselves from others, it gets positioned as being superior to others. So we whatever everybody else is doing, like white boys are going to be doing something that's a little bit different, and they're going to be seen as superior for doing that. So I think that's why we see these movements on both sides of like the sort of the political extremes. So we have depending on where you are, like schools are situated within communities. Like communities have different sorts of resources and opportunities to begin with. But so there's this sort of positioning is sort of in relation to your race and your gender. I think that helps us understand why we have these ideologies that are somewhat different than what we've seen before, but are sort of attacking the institutions in different ways.
About Ellen.
Yeah, I'm seeing, the results of hundreds of millions of dollars that have been put into these think tanks very self-consciously, whereas the quote unquote liberals who have run mainstream institutions didn't even pay attention. And all of a sudden, they are now feeling besieged on both sides. I'm very involved with a group called Historians for Peace and Democracy, who are trying to democratize the American Historical Association. We've been trying to work through something nobody's talked about, Palestine exception, which is used as one of the weapons of divisiveness, especially within top tier universities, and how that's actually related to certain types of finance and the ways in which donors and trustees, they're not always the same thing, but they are both of them people with a lot of power. Where the money comes from, is where the power is, where we're in the hands of an oligopoly at the moment. It's clear that money buys you everything until it doesn't, as we're seeing on the front pages with poor Prince Andrew. And what we're seeing as well, I think, is what Trump is doing is destroying government. This is what the neoliberal sort of think tanks, these people who've been following Hayek and all these libertarians wanted in the first place. And now they've got it. And what struck me about Nixon, for example, was that Nixon hated universities. He really did. I've read some of his stuff. But at the end, the student unrest forced him to withdraw from Vietnam. That we don't give universities enough credit for their successes. And even I did a book on the 60s that nobody ever read. But one of the things I discovered was that a lot of the social movements of the 60s began in universities. That's where they were hatched. That's where they were organized. That's where the ideas that maybe change could occur came from. And, the Vietnam War was just going along, and then Johnson escalates it. But there were universities, especially at the University of Michigan. You guys should be proud of it. That's where the anti-war movement essentially got its jump start and began with the teach-ins. So what we have to do is think about a more positive role for universities than we've been doing, because as everybody is showing, education in K through 12 and beyond is clearly a force of oppression. And we have to realize that we need to find something to replace that repressiveness with. And I'm seeing it. I mean, I've been around a lot longer than any of you. And what I've seen is that people are beginning to think about what is education for? What are we trying to do for our students that will help the rest of society, that will help the rest of the world? And, we're trying, I think that if we take a more positive view, at least we won't give up quite as quickly as we would otherwise, because it's going to be a very long haul. I mean, that's what I learned from my book about the 60s, that it took forever, but we did end the war.
Great. So now the questions are coming in. Thanks a lot for that, Ellen. That's great perspective. So Müge, and then Rebecca, and then Margot.
Just to talk about Ellen's remarks about the University of Michigan. When I came here to teach in 1988, actually, I was very struck by how, the students were not at all active. And since I had known about the Port Huron statement and everything they had done in the late 60s, I kept asking in my large classes, and I teach huge undergraduate classes between 100, 150 students, at least that's huge by our standards. I said, what's wrong with you? I mean, this is your legacy. Why aren't you continuing the legacy? And they say, oh, we can't do anything. We can't change anything. And then I said, well, but activism starts in the community level and rises up. And they say, well, we can't go anywhere with it. And when Trump was elected the first time, I said, well, what are you planning to do? I mean, I expected them to take to the streets finally, and they said, no, well, we're looking into going to Canada instead. I mean, which is fascinating for me that they couldn't commit to what is going on. So I totally agree that the students and their movement will be important. But I don't see that mobilization, unfortunately, because I think we have been compromised too much with our financialized system. And the students also have been socialized into that. And they normalize and naturalize it. And ultimately, I think since Trump marginalized all the people of color in this country, it's going to be a struggle among the whites, the progressive whites against the conservative ones that will eventually duke this out. So what I would recommend is sort of focusing on that struggle and mobilizing at least the whites to see what they want this society to look like going forward. Thank you.
Rebecca. I thought we would take like 3 questions and then Rebecca.
I'm not quite sure I can formulate this as a question, but people can comment. Yeah, at UCLA, the administrators got caught in this, horrible consulting scam where they spent, gazillions of dollars on some organization that, of course, suggested all sorts of ridiculous stuff that, no one wanted, including consolidated IT and some of the same things that Müge was talking about. Anyway, they also did it improperly, right? So it was really a total disaster. After all of this, they send around this email to us saying, we're looking for your ideas to improve efficiency and waste of money, that they sent to everybody. I mean, it was the kind of thing where you open the email and honestly you laugh hysterically. It's a joke, right? Like, is it April 1st or something? It was just so absurd. But of course, what? Anyway, but they were serious. So, I wrote back, this is totally absurd. But anyway, but it's, you just feel like pressed on all sides. And I was sure our administrators would just sell us straight out to Trump. But, our faculty associations really stepped up and, brought these suits in Northern California and this and that. And, thank goodness there were some adjunct faculty at the law schools who had the time and space and also the contacts to do these suits. So I have no faith in our administrators whatsoever, but our faculty associations really stepped up, and that was really great. And then the other thing is just our associations are mired in these, compromises as well. So a bunch of know that SWS blew up over diversity issues, and, it was really an awful experience for everybody. And this year at ASA, we've been fighting with, the president of ASA, and I don't know who else is involved, maybe some of the council. It's hard to know because, you don't really see behind some of these decisions. But basically at ASA they sort of did preemptive obedience with the Trump administration and asked a bunch of the sections to pull their diversity awards, even though these awards had gone through the section councils, sometimes over multiple years, and sometimes were enshrined in various ways in the bylaws of the sections, maybe not explicitly in all the cases, but at least implicitly. And some sections were just told, okay, you can't do that anymore, without any, consultation, and they were sort of pulled into these meetings and told to do this. And a bunch of the chairs have, protested quite vigorously, but I don't think we'll get anywhere. And of course, now it's down to a small number of people making noise, and, people get pulled off and this sort of thing. So anyway, right, I think I don't think our administrators will save us at all. At the moment, the most promising thing is sort of these faculty associations. There have been some protests at UCLA, but the administrators have basically figured out just a way to clamp everything down from the student side, including all these new rules about when you can meet and use of space and blah, blah, blah. And also, I just want to point out that our, ASA has done some good things in terms of these lawsuits and amicus briefs and this and that, but they're, fundamentally very conservative, and, we've seen these other explosions at these associations. So, yeah, I'm not sure who's going to save us. I'm pretty pessimistic about the whole thing.
Margot.
Yeah, so I just wanted to, first of all, I apologize if this has already been discussed. I'm having HVAC stuff done, so I've been in and out. If it has already been discussed, then please don't discuss it again for my benefit. But I kind of wanted to get back to the white supremacy of it all. And when the Trump administration, no, it actually wasn't the Trump administration, when the late Biden administration, after Trump was elected, wasn't president yet, it was really, it was a time, for people to sort of put your money where your mouth is, essentially. And the way that a lot of people at the University of Michigan responded to that was just like this is terrible. Like, why is this happening? And you know, we love DEI and you know, all of that stuff. And there was something about it at the time, just based on, you know, past experiences that I think a lot of people of color here at Michigan felt was a little disingenuous or perhaps too performative in some ways. But the people that were affected by that were people of color. At the University of Michigan, for example, like 11 Black women employees were fired just like that, no notice, no heads up. And yeah, they were just told you no longer have a livelihood, right? Like you no longer have a living. And so it's kind of like if you're lamenting the loss of DEI, that's yeah, like I'm with you on that. But also your experiences of having issues with that are very different from other people's experiences from having issues for that in a way that some could say is like a little realer, so to speak. But what really kind of what's happened since then, as you still hear whispers of people saying, "Oh, DEI, it's gone. That's terrible. We believe in it." But the people of color, at least many on this campus here, who already recognize the degree to which there was, you know, white racism here at Michigan. We live behind the veil. Like that was unexpected. That was not a surprise or anything. But we've been silenced and shut down, largely through intimidation. I think even some of the most senior people and so on and so forth have really, it's kind of like all hands on deck against those voices. Recognition of the experiences of people of color as they're going through that. And what really was telling for me is, you know, once the Trump administration rescinded their dear colleague letter, you know, and all of that stuff, nothing has changed. It's not like there has been this excited return. I mean, the way people were sort of lamenting the loss of DEI, one would imagine that the first thing people would be talking about is, okay, well, let's revisit this. Like, let's rethink DEI programs, how to implement them, blah, blah, blah. Um, and so I think that a different way to interpret this particular moment, um, as a turn to the right, it may also be useful to consider whether this moment is a return to the status quo. And that moments of, for example, DEI, affirmative action before that, those were actually exceptional moments. What we are seeing as a turn to the right, whatever came before this moment, I, I don't think that was standard. I don't think that was sort of the normal way of doing business in academia. And so, yeah, I just really kind of I wanted to offer that. And oh, okay, sorry. I just saw something on the screen. Anyway, yeah, I just wanted to kind of raise that issue. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. So we've had sort of three comments. I'd like to turn it over to the panelists, to whoever wants to respond at this point. And Ellen, I think you're occupying two roles right now. So I just want to let you know that I'm keeping you in line for the second round of three questions that is coming.
Okay,
So,
so let me not take up much time. Uh, can I make one point in response to Rebecca's, and then I'll shut up, which is that what you're seeing is, at least what I've seen in the American Historical Association, is a revolt by the membership. The leaders are unrepresentative. They're very hostile to whatever we've been trying to do, but they're refusing to consult the members. You know, we passed a resolution, one dealing with Palestine, one just dealing with academic freedom. and the ruling council turned it down, vetoed it, and refused to send it out to the members, which they could have done. So what we're trying to do is take over. And people have enough sense of the possibility that it can be done. We're not, they're not all armed. I mean, I'm much more scared of ICE than anything else. I think people who claim to be enlightened academics aren't going to shoot us when we're on the ground yet.
On that hopeful note, William.
Yeah, hi. Am I being heard? Okay, great. My name is William Welsh, and I'm a PhD student at UC Berkeley. Uh, and yeah, this discussion is incredibly interesting. What I can really only speak, I really only have any knowledge of the university context. And within that, I really only have a sliver of knowledge about sociology. But the 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 story that I'm kind of that's developing in my mind in the context of these remarks is a story is one of rapidly narrowing chances to materially support oneself by doing, I'm just going to call this very broadly, like research oriented towards the potentialities existing in society as opposed to merely the actually existing things in society. And that like Dylan mentioned, there's been a kind of incipient make sociology great again cohort within the discipline that has been hoping to sort of get that line of thinking out for a long time, but now there's the political context when that is kind of playing out and being celebrated. I guess my question, in a very, very broad sense, is given that people who are interested in using kind of analysis to understand the potentialities existing in society continue to be born and grow up, if those people can no longer find a plausible sort of strategy for self-reproduction within the university system, what are some theoretical predictions about what might happen to them? Will they simply fold into the labor force and have that individual potential of theirs go unrealized, or is the impossibility of reproducing oneself within the university system possibly a catalyst to some kind of other form of salaried research, such as, like, let's say, some kind of political party that doesn't, nothing the likes of which exists today. And I'll say I was particularly inspired by Professor Ray's comments, which I found very paradoxical and very evocative. So I'd be interested, especially, to hear from you. Thanks.
Great. We'll take one more question, then we'll turn it back over. So Barry.
Yeah, hi everyone. Greetings from Quebec, which as of now is still part of Canada and not yet part of the 51st state. I had, I guess, two comments. One on I think I'm glad that Ellen started talking about this. I wanted to have some points about the base of attack for the return to understanding the return to the right, and also a point on the base of resistance to that turn to the right. And it's sort of building off of some of Ellen's points. And by the way, Ellen, I wanted to say that I have read your book and that it's been really helpful for formative for my own research on thinking about the Red Scare and the New Left. So thank you. But yeah, I think we need to understand. I think I see in terms of the base of attack for the new right. Ellen, you said this, and I think it's worth amplifying just the role of the Palestine question, not just the Palestine exception, but the attack on sort of people fighting for Palestine and the weaponization of anti-Semitism as the sort of organizing logic of the rightward attack in the way that anti-communism played during the Red Scare. And then in terms of the base of resistance, right, I think Rebecca is absolutely right that, our associations have failed us, right? But the thing that if we're thinking about what's different with the resistance this time versus the Red Scare period is precisely the fact that campuses are much more unionized now. And I think that we have, like at McGill, I'm at McGill University of Montreal. We were the last the last non-union faculty in all of Quebec, and even we've started to unionize now. But there's been waves of unionization in recent years, and the AAUP has become much more of a union, less of a faculty association. And that has been the basis. So I think that creating a basis of academic workers has created, to the extent that there's a base to push back against the rightward turn, it's that form of organization that has so far proven most effective. So.
Great. So just turn it back over to panelists and see who wants to respond to those.
I think you should take the last question. There's only one comment left. I'd much rather hear that than sort of make a comment in addition.
Very good. Jose, please.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much to all, everyone who is here. I've been learning a lot. So I briefly introduce myself. Can you hear me, by the way?
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So my name is Jose Juan, and I'm a visiting scholar in an University of Michigan, and I'm teaching at Carlos III University III in Spain. And there are so many, questions that pop up in my mind. But as well, the climate, the political situation in Spain, in today's Spain, is not, it's not the same that we have in here in the US. But there are many processes at work, including the privatization, the commodification of educational services. I've been observing these trends for a few years, and we also fear, I'm afraid, the rise of the far right in today's Spain. That means the rise of Francoist political forces, fascist, Spanish fascism, and so on. So I'm interested because we have discussed censorship and self-censorship in today's American academia, and I'm especially interested in knowing how my younger colleagues, those who do not have a tenure track, we need to publish things, and how I don't want to make anybody feel uncomfortable. But I would like to learn about how they cope with fear, actually, if they feel any fear. And so that would be my question. Thank you. I don't know if there's anybody willing to respond to. Thank you.
So now we'll open it up. I don't see any other hands.
Well, yeah. I'm happy to respond, but there are others on the panel who haven't had a chance to talk other than me and Ellen. So maybe I give priority to them. And if there's any time left, I will say something, but not before that. Thank you.
Michaela, did you say, have you spoken? Maybe it would be good to hear from you.
I have spoken, but I would love to hear in this situation, especially from more senior colleagues who might have advice to pass on for the rest of us.
The ball's back in your court.
Okay.
Or someone's court.
Well, I'll be happy to talk as a senior faculty member. I have been very active because I am, in general, a human rights activist. I actually can't go back to Turkey, where I'm from originally, because I signed a peace petition to not kill Kurds, but actually to talk to them instead. And as a consequence, we became weaponized, as a security threat to the nation. And 2,200 faculty, who are Turkish, had mostly Turkish, had signed the petition. All the ones in Turkey lost their jobs. A lot of them have had to leave the country. Others, of course, left the profession, literally. And I'm working now with Academy in Exile and Scholars at Risk to sort of place them. So in a way, what happened, and I can't go back to Turkey for fear of arrest because I have been targeted specifically. It turns out there's a list of 40 people and I'm on it. So, at the Justice Ministry. So justice. Anyhow, I can't go back. But that is one side of it. Because of that, of course, when I was at Michigan, I always have been also active. We are not unionized, by the way. I think Barry is absolutely right. The first thing that I did when Trump made all these things was to, meet with the union people because I don't think we're going to be anywhere. And I said, well, why aren't we unionizing? And they said, well, they're sort of workers who unionize. We're white collar people, and therefore we don't have to, or we will not. I said, I don't care, I will. But being an activist at University of Michigan, especially in my department, has led to a lot of stigmatization and marginalization. I mean, when I stood up, for example, for the rights of graduate students of color at our CAGA, that is the Committee on Graduate Affairs, I was on that committee. And when I stood up, one of the white administrators cried because I didn't address her politely, I gather. As a consequence, well, I don't know what politeness is because I come from a culture where politeness is big, and I do usually go by those standards. And as a consequence, the chair basically said that I was creating a toxic environment for the white administrators, and because of that, she removed me from the committee, and she said that she was putting for the whole academic year me on like a thing to sort of see if I behaved, I guess, within that time, then she will reconsider it in the fall. As a consequence of this, filed a grievance with our equity department or whatever it is called. I also submitted some names to be interviewed, and of course, the chair also submitted names. They didn't at all call anyone from my list. They went totally with the other list and then decided that there were no grounds for what happened. As a consequence of that, I do not now participate in any sort of activity within the University of Michigan because I do not see any end solution. As a consequence, I am now much more integrated to other sociology departments at the national level and also internationally as well. And what I do see, because I sort of try to mentor, of course, junior people, coming up for tenure, whenever I talk to them, there is definitely fear because ultimately we are, in this white sort of hegemonic thing when, if you challenge anything at that level, you can be seen as a threat to the thing and not given tenure. So I see whenever I talk to my junior colleagues, they say to me, well, I mean, it's easier to self-censor and not at all talk about these things publicly. And once we get tenure, then we're going to sort of be able to talk about them. But when you do that, of course, you get socialized into that way of thinking. And as a consequence, you can no longer do the kind of work that you're doing. I mean, I was lucky that I sort of worked in a part of the world, in the Middle East specifically, and my activism first started there and then moved here. So I wasn't stigmatized as much when I got tenure. But I can totally understand. And it is sad that self-censorship and that feeling of fear. But I think they are doing what they could do if they want to survive and stay in academia rather than not get tenure and leave it. So I'll just leave it at that. And that, I hope, sort of answers both Jose's points and also the points made later on. Thank you.
Are there other comments at this point, or is everybody talked out? Okay, well, I want to thank everyone for coming and thank all of the panelists for doing this. I really appreciate it. I learned a lot. I think others did too. So, thanks a lot, and we'll be doing, something like this again soon. So, keep your ears open, I guess, or whatever I'm supposed to say about that for subsequent announcements. Thanks a lot to everyone. Yeah. Bye.